Just a mere 35 years since I last saw you, huh?
That's right.
How about that?
Well, hopefully I'm only taller.
Oh, I think you're wiser, you're a little bit richer, you're a little bit fulfilled.
Yeah, that's good.
Your confidence is even greater, which I think is part of what we always tried to achieve, somehow. Becoming that person that could have an impact. It's obvious.
Well, I thank you again for
Yeah.
that contribution. So, we're here with Terry Kneisler and his triumphant return to Sycamore School in Claremont.
Kind.
So, let's start at the beginning. Where did you come from, and what brought you to Claremont?
It's interesting. Where do you come from is a question that I use to facilitate administrators today learning to listen. So I've got this whole piece on where do you come from, but the most important one I think is probably from my family and principally from my grandmother, who made me feel at all times and under all conditions that right here I'm okay. So I come from this grandmother. I grew up in Chicago, went to this incredible school, and this one particular teacher, along with my parents obviously, this one particular teacher suggested that I be a counselor at a day camp when I was age 10. And I don't remember a lot about it, but I remember one thing. He always said, when you're speaking to 5-year-olds, get down on your knees so you look them directly in the eye, and so there's no question to them that you have compassion for them and you really get to know them. So those are the seminal places I come from. That's it's the root. And I think I was a counselor every single year from age 10 to 18. And then I went to this remarkable college that was all about group work, about facilitating groups. George Williams College back in Illinois. I played sports, I did all those things, but somehow it was about working with people. Helping kids to become the best they could be. Even when I was 14, somehow that was a part of it, whether I was the captain of a team or at a day camp. It was always about helping others to be the best they could be. I remember well my first job as a teacher was back in Chicago. Someone called me up and said, there's this job over at such and such. If you call up, you'll have this job. So I called up, I said, Terry Kneisler here, and he said, oh, I've heard about you. And we would like you to be a head baseball coach, a junior varsity basketball coach, and a guidance counselor. And I said, okay, I'll take the job. That literally was the job interview. And I taught there for 3 years. And during that time, I noticed, I was thinking about my career. Where was I really going? It would be great to be a coach for a period of time. But somehow I saw in 5th and 6th graders this moment when the light bulbs started to go off in their brains, where they started to see things as being connected. I made a choice. I'm going to go to graduate school and I'm going to become a 5th and 6th grade teacher. That's how I got to Claremont.
So it was graduate school that brought you to Claremont.
Yeah, basically.
Teaching opportunity.
Indeed. Made the choice and said, Claremont Graduate School is going to let me start teaching as soon as possible. Even though I'd already been a teacher, I wasn't licensed and credentialed. And then some additional magic occurred. I went around looking at all these different elementary schools and checking them out and seeing what the climate was like, because I knew what I wanted to be in. I wanted to be in a place that was dynamic. And I visited Sycamore School.
Your first impressions?
It was like it was in the air. It was child-centered, rich in terms of art, music, expression. You could sense that kids were secure. They knew that they were appreciated for who they were rather than having to fit into a certain little narrow niche. I saw that, recognized it, went in and visited Billy Vincent's class and Gene Jack's class and Pat Rohr's class and said, my God, it's a good place. So I marched into the principal's office and pretty boldly declared, so this is the place where I would like to have a job in the fall. And the principal, John Bobo, said to me at that point, Yeah, but we don't have any positions. I said, well, that's okay. I'm just telling you what I would like to see happen, and, we'll let this play out. He said, but there's no way that we're going to have a position. I said, okay, but what do I need to do to get a position? And, I think at that point he was a little frustrated with me because I really wasn't in the mode of accepting there wasn't an opportunity here. And he said, well, why don't you go volunteer as an aide in Mrs. Page's class? Now, John Bobo didn't know me at that time. Well, that was just, the door was open. Now I was going to walk through it. And I literally spent 5, maybe 6 months, at least from January to June, being a volunteer aide in Mrs. Page's classroom. Now, I might have contributed something to her classroom and her kids, but what she contributed to me was really beyond compare. Here was a woman of gentle spirit and a certainty of what she was going to do for kids, and there was no mistaking it. It was her agenda, and it was going to get done, but in the kindest, gentlest, but firm way. And so I just spent my time learning from her, and she increasingly kept giving me pieces of responsibility, and I felt like I was a co-teacher come June. And somewhere in there, John Bobo came to me and says, I think we're going to hire you somehow, some way. And sure enough, a position came open, and he gave me the job, and the rest is a little bit of history.
Well, you've gone on to great successes.
Yeah.
What are those key seminal learnings or experiences you had at that time that you still look back on, that you feel shaped you as you've gone on?
I think I learned early on that I really didn't alone know so much. But together, collectively, being in the pursuit of knowing was a rich experience. That was funny. The other day, Brian Corey said to me, it seemed, Terry, like you never answered my question. You came back with another question. And that you expected somehow for me to learn from the question I asked and you in turn asked me. So I really believed that kids were capable of far more than what they were generally given credit as being capable of learning. And if we created an environment where they were safe, that we laughed, we endeavored, we went hard after some things, and we learned together, and we used contemporary events to elevate pursuit of that understanding. I think that's really what happened. We were in pursuit, always in pursuit. And I guess I knew at the time somehow that I had the capacity to move kids, inspire kids, get them engaged. But I wouldn't have called myself a great teacher. It wasn't that I felt like I knew it all or I knew everything they needed to know, but we together were in this hunt, this pursuit of deeper understanding. And kids got it, and we took off. So I guess if there was a seminal understanding, listen to and respect the learner. And I think that still holds true today. The deeper we listen, the more we're going to know about what it is the kid needs to know or the adult needs to know, rather than thinking, I already know. So,
yeah,
good question, Ian. My goodness.
I think your love and energy and enthusiasm for that's a testament to the reason everybody's come here. And so I credit you with not just the conscious understanding of that, but the demonstration of that too.
Well, I'm humbled by people coming together, to tell you the truth. And as I read the posts that are occurring, sometimes I'm thinking, God, they're giving me way more credit than I deserve. And, I still obviously feel honored by, people coming. But I go back to what was the environment in which we endeavored. And the environment was awesome.
Well, so was Sycamore an accident, or was it by design?
I think it was, for me, quite a bit of design. It was fortuitous, but not accidental. I knew I was in pursuit of making a contribution. I'm not sure how I got that. That was my pursuit in life, but I knew I wanted to make a contribution. Was it the reading of Summerhill? Was it the attendance at the University of Chicago Lab School? Was it the experience of being at George Williams College, where the notion was you went into groups to make situations and community and organizations better? Somehow all that melded together. And I definitely knew I was on a path towards making a big contribution. It might have been the 60s too. There was an awful lot of thought going around about communal contribution, making a difference in the world peace, all these, light, airy, fairy things. But if you put it into practicality, to me, the ultimate place to do that was in school. Where could you have the greatest impact on people's lives? Not as if you were the great knower or doer or knew what should be done, but somehow helping them to realize that confidence the kids could have in themselves, that security that comes from, I'm capable. I've got the tools. I can go in front of a group and express myself with fervor. I know about the world in terms of geography. I have some sense of how numbers work. I can express myself in written form. Wow, that's power. If there's anything I wanted to give kids was that power to express and participate. And, sitting across from you and starting this forum of this weekend, I'm feeling good about the capacities exhibited. And, maybe we did something pretty special.
Yeah. So it's not just about Terry Kneisler, because as you said, it's the collective. Sycamore was an unusually powerful place because of the mixture of those philosophies and energies that came together. So let me ask you a few names. Throw a few names out there and give me your immediate responses.
Yeah.
Paul Douglas.
We went to school together. We went to graduate school together. And Paul was brilliant, innovative. We were different. It wasn't as if Paul had his guitar and maybe I had my basketball. But there was space for each of us to play on that level. And I always felt a great respect for him and him for me. But it wasn't like we were buddies. We were just two people toiling in this profound work. And there was enough space created by a principal and maybe some of the senior teachers there who kind of took us under their wings and gave us permission to create.
Lenny Katz.
I hardly knew Lenny. Lenny was he was a predecessor. He wasn't there while I was there, but I heard of Lenny Katz, and I've read his paper about the environment of playgrounds and the environment of a school and the environment of a classroom and how does it create this well-being and the ownership. So I didn't really know Lenny. I knew his name and his reputation. I don't even know if we ever physically crossed paths. Can't be sure.
Rosemary Sullivan.
Oh God, as sweet as they come. Impassioned, compassionate, great partner. As I recall, Rosemary maybe came in my second year. She's part of that whole collective team of Rosemary, Paul, Elaine, sort of offshoots of Billy. And, I wasn't in that group, but I was sort of between Lillian, Paige, and that group. I was sort of in between there. One thing that was remarkable to me is I never understood why I was always the one being asked to be the acting principal in the absence of the principal. I think maybe it's because there might have been a physicalness and a compassion, but I think it was one of the moments I started to recognize that someday I was going to be involved in administration. But
they recognized it in you.
This young teacher who had relationship skills was being asked to do some of that discipline in the absence of the principal. It was always kind of phenomenal. I don't think I ever really understood why.
John Bobo.
Oh, well, John trusted in me. Stayed out of my way. Let me educate his child. Pumped me up. And it's been a lifelong friend. So, it just doesn't get much better than that. Been at my weddings for myself and my daughters. So it's a connection that kind of goes beyond any notion of career. And here was this guy. Put this guy in front of a group and he saw the best in everybody and would do everything in his power to make them see the best in themselves, pump them up. You know, John had a capacity to be sort of a, this maybe sound bad, but sort of like a fool, you know, in a fun way. You know, just didn't care that he might be judged for being overly exuberant or silly, but he created space for all kinds of people to be there. You know, and kids knew that he was sort of a Pied Piper. You know, this was a good guy, just a great guy who loved them completely. It was kind of a calling for him to be a principal. It wasn't a job. You know, it was who he was. You know, he took hits sometimes, I think, for being present when the recall election took place. He stuck his nose way out on the line for Sycamore School in the face of the district's administration, really probably wanting it to go smoothly and Sycamore School just to close. John didn't give a damn about what the district administration might have thought about his advocacy for the school. He just went for it because he knew it was right. I don't think he ever got the credit, if you will, for being so courageous, putting his own career at risk. I feel okay about the guy, in other words.
Yes. So you're going to be faced with hundreds of people that you have to reach back 30 years to remember. How are you processing that right now? Can you distinguish the kids you had 30 years ago from the other thousands that came later?
Shockingly well. It's kind of like last night when I was looking in your eyes and I could see twinkles and expressions. I knew you. You know, it wasn't, you know, we'd sat across from each other, had interactions about who you were and what you did back then. And now it was just like the same person. It's just 30 years separated. Now, I might not have been able to tell you your name when you walked into the room, but the connection was profound. And I saw Becky Bjork last night, and you know, I could remember incidents occurred around her. They just started popping up. You know, they're just right there about the time when she ran in the President's Physical Fitness. Ran as hard as she could run after training as hard as she could train, and she made it. And I could see the joy in her face and the complete exhaustion, but somehow that strong-willedness came out in an arena where Becky previously hadn't necessarily wished to participate. So I got all those feelings about all these kids. You know, John Darnell's been writing to me on the email. I can, in his writing today, hear the same voice that I heard 30 years ago. I can see the print in his journal. You know, I can see the ridiculous cowboy boots he went strutting around the room in. You know, I can see, you know, stuff that Brian used to do being a joker, and you know, I can see playing this and doing these games. It's all right there. You know, and now it's coming flooding back. It's somewhat overwhelming at the same time that it's wonderful.
So one of my recollections is fantastic games that you brought to the school. Pin guard and bombardment and these fantastic physical energy and activities. Where did you get those? Because I don't see them replicated anywhere.
Oh, you know, I took games that I had played as a kid and I modified them to fit. I tried to eliminate as much of the aggression in games as we could, to find games that appealed to kids who weren't athletic as well as kids that were. And, you know, they didn't have to be about hitting a home run all the time or scoring a bucket, but sometimes it was just strategically positioning yourself and getting ready to run, like stealing sticks or, you know, capture the flag or all these things. And what was kind of cool to me is I knew how to do that side of things. What I wanted to do was transfer that same creativity in terms of athletics to classroom. How do we create games that cause kids to feel inspired about learning? You know, the place game. You know, other kinds of little stimulating things that we did in the classroom that got kids to think and act differently. You know, just to try. You know, to see in themselves others taking a risk, even doing oral reports. I mean, a lot of people were opposed to this notion of kids getting up in front of the class and regularly speaking. But what I thought was cool is give kids a chance incrementally to do that and find their voice. And oh man, did kids find their voice. They developed a confidence. I mean, I hope that in some way that contributed to your capacity to get up in front of people and say, well, I've done this there. I can do this anywhere. So whether it's sport or whether it's academics, that was the thing. And sometimes I'm not sure where the games came from, to be honest with you. We'd be at a moment and I'd think, let's try this. You know, and kids would go along with it and we'd try it and we'd modify it. I remember this one game we used to play. The game started by being called Elimination. And there was no way that I was going to have that game be called Elimination. Just didn't like the name. And then we called the game Solo. And then we called it Astro Ha-Cha-Cha because it was just kind of weird fun. And I think that was part of that spirit, is let's find that way that we can play meaningfully, respectfully, so kids can, just get engaged and nobody gets hurt. You know, I heard a story of how one time I threw a ball and the ball exploded.
I remember this.
And I didn't remember it until someone shared that story with me. And for a moment, I felt embarrassment that I might have thrown the ball that hard. And then I remembered, no, I only threw the ball hard when the kid across was capable of participating at that level. That I modified every throw I made or attempted to commensurate with the kid's ability to participate. And I actually, for the first time last night, got that moment when the ball exploded. And I remember throwing the ball that hard away from the person, to throw it really hard for the thrill of it. And it exploded, but it didn't have a chance of hitting the person. So I kind of gotten a little comfort that, was I out of control? I hope not ever, maybe sometimes, but it was really about playfulness. And, that everybody could remember that moment. And I think that's what we're doing, is we're creating these cool memories around playfulness, going hard, playing hard, studying hard. Kids studied hard. Oh my God, sometimes I was stunned by how hard people work, how eager they were to please too. Really remarkable.
Throwing the ball at different speeds and strengths to different kids, because that really seemed to sum up the Sycamore experience. Is that possible today? Can teachers today still throw the ball that hard to students?
Well, let's maybe think about calling it differentiating instruction instead of throwing the ball hard.
Exactly, and that's where I was going.
It's if a teacher can't, then I don't think they're teaching. To me, a teacher is like a divine physician, bringing the antidotes and the augmentations of remedies to every kid. And would you use the same remedy for every illness? No way. And kids don't have illnesses, but they have different capacities and securities or insecurities or interests or fears. And really the job is, in my mind, is to inspire kids to be the greatest they can be. I made a big deal every year about asking kids what they really loved, what they really wanted to know more about. And I did an inventory of every single kid every year, and I went out and got books, 5 or 6 books for every kid in the room on the topics that they said they loved. Because I wanted to make sure at the very beginning, every kid had books to read that would inspire them to read deeply. So I think if we're not doing that, if teachers aren't sensing the power of this differentiation of instruction, we had 6 different math books in our classroom every year. Every kid was on a different page in their math books. And my job, I always felt, was to work with every kid at the pace they could go at. Because there were some kids that would just fire off. I mean, they would be going to the skies, and all of a sudden they'd slow down in their math book. But I was monitoring where they were in terms of the page where they were on and knew where they were getting it. And then I would do all class lessons, and sometimes, Ian McPherson would have this lesson mastered, and I'd say, look, Ian, the rest of the class is going to be working on this. I want you to go work on that right now. I do not want you to interrupt what we're doing, but you don't have to participate in this lesson. And so I'd have maybe 15, 18, 22 kids out of 30 kids focusing on the lesson, but I'd have other kids in the room who didn't need to. I already knew where they were. So we were always doing that kind of differentiation. It's kind of like writing in journals in the morning. It was really cool. Every kid wrote in a different way, a different style, different volume, but every kid wrote, and I would write back to them. So I think that's what a teacher ought to be doing all the time. I mean, if you really want to learn, you want somebody to craft the experience to your interest. And then at some point the interest becomes all yours, and then you learn through some kind of mentorship, or you seek your own resource to learn. I think that's what I was always trying to achieve. Let's move you to a spot where you could learn for yourself and independently. I'm hoping teachers can do that today. I think there's ugly stuff happening in education right now, where No Child Left Behind has created this, era of consequence. That schools will be called failures, or classrooms will be called inadequate based on some arbitrary moment in time when assessment's done. It doesn't work. Really what we ought to be looking at is, where's a kid today? Where do they get to? What's the growth that takes place as a result of the teacher's impact on their lives? That's how we ought to be measuring. I mean, I've got kids in my present school district, 35% of whom come in not speaking English. 65% of the kids in my present school district who have a free and reduced lunch. They really have socioeconomic challenges. Many don't have two parents. So to me is, how does a teacher take a kid from right here, right now, and move them as far as they can go during this period of time? That's exciting. And if it isn't exciting for a teacher, you're in the wrong profession. Find another deal, because it isn't about making money, it's about moving kids to capacity. So I think it still exists. I hope so. That's the feeling I get about it today. It's no different than 35 years ago. I love it. Inspiring.
That's great. That's great. Sycamore wouldn't have been the place it was if it weren't in Claremont. Claremont was a different place too. You had the colleges, and you had certainly a sense of the time of the 70s. What do you remember most about the 70s in Claremont?
Well, I'd contend what you just said to start with. I think it's about teachers and people shaping a school. And it didn't really matter whether it was in Claremont or not. It's what kind of environment got created. It's kind of the Summerhill concept. Now, but I do remember some things about the 70s. There was a bit of counter culture, valuing of experimentation, risk-taking, knowledge of that we weren't like Condit. There's almost a pride of, we're not doing it that way, we're doing it this way. And if there's one thing I loved, it was that there were kids from the barrio who went to our school. There were the Wilson Davises, who just to me was a prince of a person. And so we had this rich mix. Mind you, we had the benefit of people involved in the colleges whose kids were going to school, but we had other kids there. So I wish we had more diversity, to be honest with you, but we had some diversity. So I remember the 70s and Sycamore School as being a time of stretching, trying things out. I don't think we yet had the backlash of the late 70s, early 80s. It was a place where we could try things, and there was a leader in the school who gave permission to try things. And I think we're still under the influence of the 60s, the music, the flower children, the drug culture, where there was open your minds, open to possibilities. So I think we're under the influence in a good way.
Yeah, and that's really what I was driving at with the Sycamore in Claremont. Claremont, with the colleges here, certainly had a strong representation of the counterculture.
Mm-hmm. There was a melting pot of ideas,
Yeah.
And it was good ideas. And having the arts present all around us, really good thing. Here's what's really amazing. We didn't have teachers who taught art as their specialty. We had classroom teachers who valued art as part of the curriculum. I mean, do you remember doing tie-dye in our classrooms?
Of course.
And we all had our flags hanging from the ceilings. And, we all did these. We would create the optimal bedroom or the perfect home or the perfect pen, and everybody had their own way of designing it. And our couches were quilts of various fabrics that kids had sewed. I mean, it was happening amidst us. It wasn't separate from us. It was part of our environment. And I think that's, or all our name tags had special designs on them. That's what gave ownership to the room. It was our room.
Those were the lessons also, and you can create your own reality.
I love it. That's right.
Take a leap. It's astounding to think back on the idea of building lofts where kids climbed up on top of furniture to read, or they had couches and pillows that were the main meeting room in the middle of the room.
Yeah. I remember going in on weekends and constructing the secure loft so that kids would be safe. But to me, it was all about, I wanted kids to be so in the moment of comfort around reading that there was a culture that we were creating. When it was reading time, you needed to be reading. And that's because it was so good. And I wanted you to drift away with your imagination. I wanted you to read with fervor. And I remember when it was time for me to read at the end of the day, it was 2:40 and school was going to be out at 3:10, and that was a signal that it was time for me to take out a book and I'd read to the classroom. And the requirements were the same. You could do anything at your desk so long as it didn't keep anybody else from listening. And I don't know if you remember it, but students would be coming back from El Roble, as 7th graders, and they would enter the room silently. They would find a spot, and they would just sit and listen. And sometimes there were 2 or 3, and sometimes there were 10 7th graders who were in the room for the last half hour, 20 minutes of the day, just being part of that, I don't know, some kind of culture that said, I'm respected here, and I'm safe here, and I still know some of my friends who are a grade younger, and it's good to come back. So it's part of what we created. I feel sometimes that people give me too much credit for just some pure instincts that said, if you're observant, follow that lead, you'll know that it works.
So those experiences, how do they translate to being a father? What did you take from that you brought to fatherhood?
That's a question I didn't expect.
Because you were very much a father figure to
I know.
a lot of kids.
I know. Well, I took the notion of being a teacher in so much earnestness that the day often began before school began. The lunch was school. After school was school. And for some kids, I knew that their dads maybe weren't present in their life. And sometimes even Mr. Bobo would come to me and say, hey, this kid doesn't have a dad around, and I'm putting him in your room or her in your room because they're missing a male figure. Okay. But something rather remarkable happened to me, and it was, I call it sort of like giving juice. You're putting out everything you have into that moment and those kids, and you're in an environment that feels like, I compare it to being in a washing machine for the whole day, where you're just being tumbled around and turned around, and there are sounds coming from here and there, and you're so present and you're so engaged and enveloped. I can't imagine how I could even think of doing it today. I'd be so exhausted by it all. I had the energy. I was young, and I was engaged so much in causing kids to be the best they could be. And then one day I noticed I want this for myself in a deeper, more profound way. I want all of it. And when you're given that level of juice to a classroom, and then you're looking at becoming a dad, this may seem bad, but I don't think you can do both completely. So after I left Sycamore, I went to a place where I was superintendent of a district, principal of a school, and full-time teacher. And I had 15 kids in the class. So I was able to do it, and I was still given juice, but all of a sudden now, in a new marriage, I was about to have a baby. And I knew I wanted to give my absolute juice to being a dad. And it's the best thing ever happened to my life. I have 3 daughters who I've given every ounce of me to them, and they are just, God, they're great people. And I still go back now and teach 5th grade sometimes while I'm a superintendent of 11,000 students and 20 schools. And I go in and teach a 5th grade class for 4 weeks, twice a week. And play the 3-5-7 game. Do you remember the 3-5-7 game? 3 lines, 5 lines, 7 lines? You'd remember it if we went back to it. I do that, and I teach them strategies for reading and presentation. I love it. But I couldn't do it every day now. Couldn't even conceive of it. Being a dad and being, older, and maybe the energy I couldn't do it. Every day I was exhausted when I'd come home from teaching. And I like the level of exhaustion I put into being a dad in the same way. The payoff was huge. Just like the payoff with the students was huge. But it transferred. Maybe the key difference was the conditions kids had in their life when they came to me, I couldn't really change those. But what I could give to them in the 6 hours that we spent together is that I believed in them. I saw the potential in them. And whatever those other circumstances may have been, or whatever insecurities they had about being in a social setting, we could help to alleviate those. So we created a level playing field, a respect, and somehow the kids got lifted up. Just kind of started seeing themselves in a way that I'm capable. I'm successful. My teacher tells me I'm a good person. And I think that's the same thing dads have to do.
Well, I think that's one of the things I've seen just in the emails is the degree to which the kids who came out of that experience were self-empowered and had the sense of self to go and become exactly what it is they wanted to become, and in many cases the best they could become. And that again goes back to the collective of the experience, but it's something unique that I think is the common thread that binds Sycamore kids and creates this unity that's manifesting itself this weekend.
I think you're so on to that. It's a sufficient respect and personal security of I'm okay. Kind of like what my grandmother made me feel back when.
That's right.
And that's all what I wanted to transmit in being a teacher. And when kids feel that, the world's possible. And I think these Sycamoreans, they are conquering the world. I hear the stories, I'm blown away. Look at you, man. I hear the stuff you're doing, and I'm thinking, little Ian McPherson? But it was all there. Yeah, you found a way.
Yeah. So, what do you hope to get out of this weekend?
Get out of it?
Let me rephrase that. What are you most looking forward to this weekend?
Like we're doing right now, sitting across from somebody, seeing the goodness in them, hearing their story, feeling like their lives are fulfilled, just being with them. And the imagination of coming here is more than anybody could imagine. As I was looking forward to coming here, I relived every aspect of being a teacher. The moments, even the doubts, but mostly the magic of learning. So what could be better than that? So being here is just being here, talking, reminiscing, laughing. You know, it just hearing how the perceptions occurred and how it became this over here on this side, and it's really different over on this side, and somehow those notions are going to meet and we're all going to laugh and, you know, understand that, well, we see the world differently, but it's okay. So I'm just being here now, you know, hanging out with people whose lives we touched.
That's the Sycamore way.
It's great.
That's probably a good thing to wrap up on.
I like it. Thanks for the time.
Thanks, Terry.
Yeah, it's the best.